Thanks so much. Actually, I'd love to know who's in the room and what stages you guys are at, or if you're an aspiring founder or raising. So is there any founders in the room?
Struggling academic.
Any struggling academics in the room?
There's quite a few of those, I think.
This is for you. This is very, very kind of basic fundraising 101, and I'll talk a little bit about Blackbird, and then this presentation is actually a 30-minute presentation, so I'm going to squeeze it to 15 minutes and just give me the signal if I'm going over time. But I'll quickly get started. So as you said, I am part of Blackbird, and Blackbird is a venture capital firm. We invest in early stage technology startups, and we invest very, very early on. So the smallest check size, I think, was a 60K check size, and the largest check size was around 20 mil. So it's a very broad range. And we invest across all industry as well. So AR, VR, and software, and hardware, and space, and synthetic biology. So a lot of very broad-ranging companies. But the common thing that all of our companies have in common is the founder who is very globally ambitious and wanting to be the best in the world at what they do, and not just the best in Australia and New Zealand. And so we love to meet those types of founders. And if that's you, then I'd love to meet you at the end of this presentation. Cool, and also, as was mentioned before, I came to New Zealand end of last year with our partner Samantha Wong to lead a $60 million fund, and that's to invest in the early stage companies in New Zealand. And so a bit about Blackbird. We got started about 8 years ago, and back then there were pretty much no venture capital in Australia and New Zealand, but there were really amazing tech companies like Atlassian and Aconex and Campaign Monitor all coming up and seeking funding in the US or overseas somewhere else. And so we started this company so that we can actually invest in the best people that live in Australia and New Zealand. And so when the founders of Blackbird actually went out fundraising and found that they couldn't raise any money from the large institutions because no one really believed that there was a space for venture capital in Australia and New Zealand. But what ended up happening was that we ended up raising from experienced tech founders and operators who have been there and done that, like the founders of Atlassian and Xero and those guys who are like, yes, I believe that you can build a global company from New Zealand, and hell yes, we'll back them. And the awesome thing about that is that they didn't just bring the capital to Blackbird, they also brought their operating expertise, they brought their networks, and they most importantly brought the founder empathy that you need from an investor, because as you know, it's so difficult to build a startup, and if you don't have that empathy, shit hits the fan. So that's how Blackbird got started, and we essentially ended up being a founders fund where we had a bunch of people who invested in the company that are also founders. And so our mission is to supercharge the most ambitious Aussie and Kiwi founders, and ultimately this is a very long-term mission for us, and a great partnership for us looks like investing in a company over the next 10, 20 years, and investing from a small check size and again in follow-on rounds. So an example of this would be 8 years ago, we invested in a design platform called Canva. We wrote the first $250,000 check into the company when it was just an idea and they had a few users. And over the past 8 years, we've invested close to, I think, $200 million into the company. And it's just the trajectory of the company grew as much as the level of capital that they need to help them back the company. So actually, I'll jump in and quickly talk a bit about Fundraising 101 and have more examples in the next slides as well. Cool, so basically fundraising, there's a bunch of ways you can do it, but the broad categories are you can bootstrap, you can raise from family and friends, you can raise from high angels and net worths, or venture capital. And bootstrap basically means that you're paying out of your own pocket. You don't really need to fundraise from anyone. Or you can raise capital from friends and family. That will make for a very awkward Christmas if you don't show any progress. Or you can raise from angels and high net worths, in particular in your industry, so that can bring some sort of operating expertise as well as the capital. Or you can go down the venture route. And I think the venture is a pretty unique one. And the reason you do that and go down this venture is because you're trying to grow and scale really fast. And typically, if you're growing and scaling really fast, you're constantly raising money. So you're making progress, you have lots more users and customers, and therefore you need to raise more money. And Generally, if you're raising from individuals, they can write you 1 to 2 checks maximum, but then it's kind of go out and find your own capital. And so venture capital is set up in a way where we want to invest in your follow-on rounds. So every 12 to 18 months, you're raising more and more money as you hit higher and higher milestones at a higher valuation. And so we can keep investing more and more. And so why venture capital? Ability to follow on with writing second, third, fourth, fifth checks in different series. Also connections to overseas co-investors as well. And so as you're raising larger rounds, you need more investors to come in and help back that as well. And this is kind of a longer term problem and a nice problem to have, but if you're scaling overseas and you need investors in China or the US, and then the VCs tend to co-invest alongside each other and they give you that connection. And last but not least, there's a community of founders and talent as well, which you might want to tap into. So the awesome thing about being backed by VC is the community of the portfolio companies. And we always say the best help we can give founders is to link them with founders who are just a couple of steps ahead, not so far ahead where they forget how ugly it is in the very early stage, but just enough ahead to kind of help you see around the corners. And so community of founders and also talent. And there's lots of great talent coming back to New Zealand with COVID as well. And the first port of call tends to be portfolio companies or VCs that then tend to look at. And so we've been helping our portfolio companies hire great talent as well. So that's kind of the upside. Awesome. I'll rush through this. So there's different stages of fundraising. Basically, in the very, very early stages, there's kind of the pre-seed, seed, Series A round, and then there's Series B onwards, but let's not worry about that for now. So there's lots of different definitions for these different stages. Particularly, it varies a lot in terms of the monetary value. So in New Zealand, a pre-seed is like a 500K round, whereas in the US, it could be like a 2 mil round. So I won't touch on the monetary value, but I'll touch on the milestones that investors typically see in order to get fundraising at each stage of the rounds. So typically with pre-seed, there has to be some sort of evidence of learnings of a minimum viable product or a proof of concept. And there's some sort of earned insight where you have insights into something that your competitors don't necessarily believe in. So some sort of point of difference that makes your insights pretty unique. And we love to see that as opposed to another copycat product. And so, for example, let's go with Vexev. So they are 2 PhD students in New South Wales, and they developed this system that scans your veins to detect if you have any cavities, to predict if you have any heart disease. And at that stage, they were still collecting the data, and they were lugging around this huge kind of suitcase of ultrasound machine to scan a lot of veins and collect the data, and going into the theatres and watching little surgeries being done. And at that stage, they were already talking to the customers, they were already kind of in the workflow, understand how it worked, and they really put customer that's 5 minutes ago, really put customer at the beginning of their journey as opposed to at the end. And so if you leave today with one thing, I think the most important thing to remember is customer should be the beginning point, not the product. And a lot of people think about, I have to have this awesome product, I've got this awesome idea, but it's at the end of the day, it's like, who will buy if you build this? Who is going to pay for this? Who is obsessively in love with this product? And that's what we want to see is evidence of customer love. Seed is around kind of the learnings from the next iteration. So your product is out there, you're talking to customers, they're all part of that journey with you, so you can make the correct iteration. And there's some sort of evidence of customer love, there's some sort of traction, and some idea of product roadmap. So investors are here not because of what you've built today, but the potential of what you can build in the future. That's why we're interested in kind of the roadmap, and that's why the follow-on rounds are so important, because we tend to build the relationship and ownership over time with that, with your startup as opposed to what you have today. And Series A is at a stage where you've found that product market fit, you've found the love and the customer love, the niche, and you're ready to raise to scale. So this is raising to scale, and you're on a roll, and you need to expand, and everything's going great. So that's kind of that stage. This is the reality of fundraising. It is a 6-month full-time job, and if you're going down the venture capital route, it does take so much time. So if you're a solo founder, it could be quite difficult because your product is on hold, but if you're a co-founder, one person's literally doing it full-time. You spend the first month or so preparing the pitch deck, and that is the story that you tell to investors to get that buy-in. So it's actually really important to get that right. Why you? Why now? Why is the market ready at this point in time? And the target list of investors as well, because you don't really want to waste time pitching to a fintech company, a fintech venture capital investor if you're pitching a VR product that has nothing to do with fintech. And the reality is it takes like 40 to 100 meetings to tell the story over and over again. And by the end of it, you will probably be able to regurgitate your pitch deck in your sleep. And then the last couple of months is the partner meetings. So when you go through the VC route, you tend to meet the partner or the principal for the first couple of times for coffee. And then if the principal or partner gets excited about the company, they bring you to pitch to the rest of the investment team. And then after that, they'll make the decision of whether to pursue due diligence or not. And then lastly, if you're lucky, you'll get more than one term sheet. And the term sheet is really around how much they want to invest in your company, at what valuation, at what terms. And this is the part where I highly recommend getting a lawyer, because no matter how much you Google, there's always something that will catch you out in this stage. And then there'll be all the legal docs, and then they wire the money. So that's the 6 months, but building a really long-term global company takes ages, and 8 years plus. And you'll constantly be fundraising, building the company, fundraising, building the company, and startups tend to raise every 12 to 18 months. But the most important part is building the company and building the product and getting that customer love and getting the customer buy-in. And fundraising is only just the part where you fill in the tank so you can hire more people and keep building that product. So that is the filling the tank part. I think I'll stop there actually, because we're already at time, but thank you.